Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name's Kaylee and these are my books. So today's video is my favorite video to make on my channel because it is my TBR game called TBRLAND. This is a Candyland inspired TBR game and I will be creating my TBR for November through this game. Now, I do already have a mini TBR for November up on my channel, and this is because I am a co-host for Once Upon a Readathon, so I have 5 books on that TBR. I'm gonna try to not reuse the books that I put on that TBR for this TBR game, but we'll see. No promises, you know. If we get in a tight bind, I might try to reuse some of those books because I'm not trying to overwhelm myself. But the goals for November and December are for me to just finish up some series. I am in the middle of a million series and it's very overwhelming and I don't like it because I do not have a big memory and therefore I feel like all of the books in the beginning of the series that I've started months and months ago are slowly leaving my brain and I really need to continue on with these series before I have to reread all these books that I already read, and I just do not have time to be doing that many rereads. Therefore, for this TBR game, I'm going to try to fit as many sequels into it as I can, and that's going to be a trend in December as well. I'm in the middle of series that are both fantasy series and romance series. Not so much thriller or horror because I feel like series aren't really a thing in thriller and horror, but definitely romance, especially KU romance and fantasy. I really need to continue on with so many series. It's a lot. So many. So I'm going to cut to me playing the game and then we'll cut back to me picking my first book. First card pull, double pink, good start. So we landed on a backlist thriller or horror book. So the first card pull had me land on a backlist thriller or horror book, and so I've chosen this Dean Koontz Dragon Tears book. I basically just looked at my unread shelves and was like, okay, which thriller or horror book is the oldest? And it was this one. I really know nothing about this book. It's not in the best shape. My mom gave it to me because she read it and she was gonna get rid of it, and I was like, I'll take it. And that's the story of how I ended up with this book, and I know nothing. Also, it's really annoying because why on the back is it just him? I don't care about what he looks like. I need the synopsis here. Like, what does this give me? Why is his picture so big? Are you kidding me? Look at that mustache. He's smiling. He's like so smug that he took up the synopsis space. Look at how he stares at you. And even when you look on Goodreads, the synopsis there is not really a synopsis. It's just kind of like some random sentences that maybe the book starts out with. But I think this is thriller, horror, genre blend with some sci-fi elements, maybe some people who know like what time they're gonna die based off of that Goodreads synopsis. I really don't know much about this book, okay? I should have done more research, but I was afraid of getting spoiled if I was looking too hard for a synopsis, because for the thriller and horror book, I really care about not being spoiled. And because this book is so old, I didn't want to do too much of a deep dive of research because there's a lot of people that might think it's just kind of common knowledge by this point due to its publication date, because this book is older than I am. It was copyrighted in 1989. Second card pull, one purple. So then a recent release thriller or horror book. The next card pull had us land on a recent release thriller or horror book, so kind of funny we got a backlist and a recent release, but for a recent release, I am choosing Hidden Pictures. This was published in 2022, so definitely super recent, and a lot of my friends have loved this book, and I am so excited to read this book because all throughout there are like creepy kids pictures. And I'm a huge fan when a book is doing something new, and this book has like multiple pages in a row of kid pictures all throughout. Let me show you the side of the book because you can see all those gray pages. I think those are just all the illustrations that are throughout this book. I believe that this book is another thriller and horror genre blend, but maybe closer to the horror side, I'm not sure. But the premise is that a nanny starts babysitting a new kid, and the kid is like incredibly creepy, hence the illustrations all throughout this book. And you know, creepy kids are like one of the best horror tropes ever because kids are so creepy. They say the weirdest things. You're just like, do you know something that I don't? So I'm so excited to read this book and read about this creepy kid and experience the drawings throughout this book. And I'm especially excited because so many of my friends have given this book 5 stars. Third card pull, a double purple. So we're starting a series in fantasy or science fiction. The next space that we landed on was probably the space that I was wanting to avoid the most, and it was start a series in the fantasy and science fiction section. I am already in the middle of too many series. I can't be starting them. And so I'm kind of cheating and I'm pulling from my TBR video that I did for the Once Upon a Readathon because I already committed to starting this series, which is Ashes of the Sun. Hi, editing Kaylee here. I filmed this yesterday and I've just decided instead of reusing a book from my Once Upon a Readathon TBR for the start of series, I'm actually going to include A Touch of Light, which is up on the screen here somewhere, as my start of series book because I really want to read this in November and it is the first book in a series, so it just makes sense to put this in the prompt here instead of me reusing a book you've already heard about. A Touch of Light is one of the finalists for SPFBO, which is a blog off award type of situation for self-published fantasy, and Cassidy gave this book 5 stars and I'm really excited to read it because I'm reading all of the finalists for SPFBO. Fingers crossed I love it. It is book 1 of a new adult epic fantasy series. The author seems like a really cool person, so I'm hoping to love his book. And actually today was just a cover reveal for book 2 and I was watching Cassidy's video and it got me so hyped to read this series. So I was like, you know what, screw it. I haven't edited the video yet. I'm gonna edit it right after I'm done filming this. But I am putting in A Touch of Light instead of Ashes of the Sun. I'm still reading Ashes of the Sun. I just need A Touch of Light to be on my official TBR. So ignore me talking about Ashes of the Sun. I talk about that in my Once Upon a Readathon TBR, but the official book for this TBRLAND prompt is A Touch of Light. All right, I pulled the board down a little bit. You can kind of see the stuff I'm using to keep it flat, but that way you can see the whole rest of the board. We're doing pretty good so far. So let's go into our 4th card pull, which is 1 pink. So now we're at a backlist fantasy or science fiction book. Man, we're really loving the backlist prompt this time around. The next space we landed on was a backlist science fiction or fantasy book, and for this I chose Blood Rights by Jim Butcher. This is book 6 in the Dresden Files, and I love the Dresden Files. The Dresden Files is basically a long series about a wizard detective, Harry Dresden, and it is an urban fantasy because it's set in our world, but there are just also some magical things going on, including a wizard that's just trying to solve life's mysteries. He is a private investigator, and each book is a new adventure that he goes on. I believe they start out fairly episodic, therefore books 1, 2, and 3 are pretty self-contained plots, but as you continue on in the series, we start getting this wider world being built out, and so this is book 6, so I'm expecting a self-contained mystery along with some more intrigue about the greater world. You may be thinking this book looks familiar, and you would be right because this was featured on my September TBR, and I didn't get to it. Therefore, I failed my September TBR, and I'm re-putting it on my November TBR because I do really want to read this book. I just didn't get to it in September. But because I failed September's TBR, you will see that I gave myself a punishment, but that won't be until the end of the video. So now we're on to our 5th card pull, which is 1 purple. Oh my god, and so a recent release, fantasy or science fiction. Man, we're getting backlist and the recent release for like every genre. Next, we landed on a recent release science fiction or fantasy book, and for this I am choosing Stones of Light. This is book 2 in an indie fantasy series that currently Cassidy and Mel are both doing a Patreon buddy read of the series, or I guess a read along of the series because we're reading the whole trilogy. Honestly, book 1 did not go well, okay? Book 1 I wasn't a huge fan of. I think I gave it a low 3, and the more I think about it, the more I want to give it a 2. I just didn't really enjoy it. However, I love Cassidy, I love Mel, and this series has so much love, and I just want to be able to participate in conversations with them about it, so I'm going to give book 2 another go, and I'm hoping that we all like it more. Alright, we are on our 6th card pull, but I just wanted to draw our attention to the fact that we've only gotten pinks and purples so far, so let's hope for a green or a blue just to mix it up a little bit. And we got a green, so we're getting a physical book for fantasy or science fiction. The next space we landed on was a physical book for science fiction or fantasy book, and this is just basically a prompt to make sure that I'm reading the books that I own. So I chose Blood Trader by Lynette Noni. This is book 3 in the series and the end of a trilogy, and therefore I could finish this series with this book, which is very exciting. I read book 2 a couple of months ago. This is actually a YA fantasy series, but I surprisingly really enjoyed this series. So even though it is YA, I'm still having a great time with it. The first book in this series is called Prison Healer, and basically the premise for the first book is we have this girl who is in this brutal, harsh prison, and she is the healer in that prison. But she is a prisoner still. She doesn't just work for them. Like, she is a prisoner with a prison job, and her prison job is basically like a doctor figure. But due to a crazy turn of events, she ends up having to participate in these magic trials for the prince of the realm. I would consider this series a fantasy romance series. It's a lot like Sarah J. Maas, where there is a full fantasy plot, but I feel like it's equally focused on fantasy and romance. And I just have a super pretty copy of this book too that I want to show off really quick. I have pretty copies of all of the books in this series, which is exciting. And then some art on the dust jacket. And I'm incredibly excited to get to this book in November.
All right, we're on our 7th card pull, and I'm officially getting a little bit nervous because we've gone through 6 already and we're only about halfway through. So let's, fingers crossed, we start getting some good movement. So we are getting double purple. This is good. This is good movement. So we're moving past this one into a KU romance.
Okay, our next card pull took us into the romance section. We landed on a KU romance. And I was having some trouble deciding what KU romance I want to read. And so I just kind of looked at the KU romances that I had checked out currently and did a random number to select one of them, and it selected A Deal with the Elf King. I'm very excited for this. This is a fantasy romance, as you can probably tell from the title. And I've heard it has a lot of similar tropes to ACOTAR in this series. I've heard it's not as good, which is fine. But basically, I think a woman gets sold or bought or kidnapped or something, somehow against her will, she ends up married to this elf king, which I think is like a fae figure, maybe. And it's just about her learning about this new magic world and possibly falling in love.
All right, now our 8th card pull, we got one pink, and we got a mafia romance.
For the next card pull, we landed on Mafia Romance, which I'm very excited about because I'm currently working my way through Sophie Lark's writing. I've read the first 2 books in the Brutal Birthright series, so for Mafia Romance prompt, I will be picking up book 3, which is called Savage Lover. Sophie Lark's Mafia Romance is very, very fun because it's like created this large mafia universe that just gets expanded with each book, and the characters in the last books sometimes make cameos in the future books. So I'm excited for book 3 to see if book 1 and book 2 characters kind of show up in book 3. And I just want to work my way through all of Sophie Lark's writing because I really enjoy her books. So I'm excited to pick up book 3.
9th card pull, a purple. Pinks and purples today, man. We got a serial killer or kidnapping romance.
Next up, we landed on a serial killer or kidnapping romance. And for this, I might be stretching it a little bit, but I don't really think I am. I'm going to pick up War by Laura Thalassa. I read Pestilence by her a couple of months ago, like maybe 6 or 7 months ago at this point, and I really want to continue on in the Four Horsemen series. So book 2 in that series is called War, and I'm counting it for kidnapping because I believe that our female heroine gets kidnapped by War and his army. So I'm pretty sure that counts. I mean, she gets kidnapped. It's not like a traditional serial killer because he's one of the horsemen of the apocalypse, but he is killing a lot of people. He's killing many, many humans. So I'm counting it. And if you couldn't tell from what I just said, basically this is a series that follows each horseman of the apocalypse. The apocalypse is on Earth. The horsemen have come down to Earth to start the apocalypse. And it's about women falling in love with them and possibly stopping the apocalypse along the way. But of course, this is very, very, very dark. Like, the horsemen are trying to start the apocalypse. So pestilence, war, death, famine, they're doing very bad things on Earth, okay? This is a dark, dark, dark romance, but it's so much fun. And I believe the exact premise for War is about this woman who gets kidnapped by an army, and it happens to be War's military. And War is like, okay, you're my new wife. And it's just about them getting along or not getting along, and about her allegiance to Earth and the rest of the people or to one of this horsemen of the apocalypse.
So now our 10th card pull, one blue, a fantasy romance.
Next up, we landed on fantasy romance, which I'm really excited about because I recently read A Song of the Marked, which is book 1 in a fantasy romance series on Kindle Unlimited, and I really enjoyed it. So I will be picking up book 2, which is called The Twist of the Blade, for this fantasy romance prompt. And basically, this book series is about a plague that is spreading across the kingdom, and no one really knows what this plague is or where it came from, but it seems quite magical. And the king of the kingdom has been experimenting on people that have survived the plague, and once the king calls you in and finds out that you've survived the plague, you're never seen from again. So basically, this is about our main character who has survived the plague, and when you survive the plague, you kind of turn all gray, so it's very visible that you are a survivor. And it's just about her trying to survive in this kingdom and not get taken by the king. And this is, of course, a fantasy romance, but I feel like it's a little bit of a spoiler to say who the romance is between, but rest assured there is quite a bit of romance.
And our 11th card pool, maybe our last, depending on what we get. Let's see. 1 pink, so not our last. We got a reverse harem romance. We have a lot of romances to work with.
All right, we landed on reverse harem. I feel like we've landed on reverse harem every single time that I've played this game. And I swear the romance part is the same length as the science fiction and fantasy part and the thriller and horror part. And somehow every time I play this game, we land on so many more romance prompts than we do thriller and horror and science fiction and fantasy. But it's the same amount of spaces. I don't know how this happens every time, but yet again, we've landed on reverse harem. I'm not mad about it though, because I love a reverse harem story. And I've really been wanting to read some of Mary Misty's work, which is a reverse harem fantasy romance author on Kindle Unlimited that my friend Hannah, her channel's name is Hannah Blackwell, she'll be linked below, but she loves this author's work. She actually did an interview with the author, and I watched the interview, and the author seems like a lovely person, and I would love to try her books because the author seems great and Hannah loves her books. So the first book that I'm going to be picking up from this author is A Demon's Horn, and I think this is a magic school for demons, and like you get sorted into different things in the magic school based on your magic capability or something like that, and it just sounds so good. I love a magic school. Demons sound so fun, and reverse harem on top of that, sign me up.
All right, moving into our 12th card pool. Fingers crossed it's the last one. Let's see. Not the last one. Less than 200 pages, and I wrote it wrong, but this means less than 200 pages in my dumb way of saying it. I swear it's meant to say less than 200, okay? Okay.
All right, next we landed on the space that I was hoping we would never land on, so I wouldn't have to expose myself for writing the freaking less than sign wrong. I don't know how it happened. I swear I know what the less than sign looks like, but for some reason I put greater than. It's supposed to say less than 200 pages. So a book that's less than 200 pages that is also a romance book, I've chosen to pick up book 4 in the Ice Planet Barbarian series, which is Barbarian Mine. I believe that this book is 196 pages, so just under 200. I unironically love Ice Planet Barbarians. The first 3 books were all such a fun time, so I'm excited to continue on with book 4. The premise for this is a bunch of human women get kidnapped, they crash land on an alien planet, and there's a bunch of blue men there that need wives. And each book in this series is following a different human woman.
All right, we're moving into our 13th card pool. 13. This better be the last one. It is the last one. We made it to the mood read. Thank God. Okay. Thank you and good night.
All right, and then we landed on a mood read, but you might remember earlier on in this video, I mentioned that I failed my September TBR, and therefore I'm giving myself a punishment for November. You'll see that it's kind of a little bit belated, but that's because I'm filming this video in October, so therefore I don't know if I failed my October TBR yet, but I do know I failed my September TBR. So the punishments are just going to be like kind of 2 months after the fact. But a punishment for failing my September TBR, I've decided that instead of a mood read as my last prompt, it's going to be a randomly generated book. Meaning I look at all the books I currently own and I assign them each a number, and then I put the numbers in a random number generator, and the book that it selected was Vespertine. This is a YA fantasy. But the cover is so pretty. I really am a big fan of the cover. I picked this up back when I read more YA fantasy, but I have since stopped picking up YA fantasy. However, I do still own a lot of unread YA fantasy. So I'm gonna still give all the books that I own a go because I might still like it. After all, I really enjoy the Prison Healer series, and that's YA. And I believe the premise for this book is we follow our main character who works for priestesses, and she kind of cleans dead bodies and buries them so that their souls won't come back to life. And in a time of great desperation, she summons a evil spirit to help her out magically. And after this time of great need, she's kind of stuck with this evil spirit, and the evil spirit wants to possess her, but she can also use the evil spirit to be super, super powerful, but it's a constant threat on her life. So I believe it's just her moving through the world, having this illegal evil spirit attached to her. I also believe that this is a standalone. Thank God I'm not starting another series with this book. This is a standalone, so I will be starting and finishing this series with this one book. Alright, so here are all of my books on my physical TBR. I know I have quite a few books that I will be reading through ebooks as well, but here are the books that I currently own. I'm excited about all of them. Probably the one I'm the least excited for is this Dean Koontz book, just because I know nothing about this book. I know nothing about this author, but he's such an iconic guy that I feel like I need to try one of his books. And since I own it and my mom read it, this will be the one I try. Let me know down in the comments what you will be reading for November. I have kind of a hefty TBR because this game was not very nice to me, and I had quite a few card pulls along with my Once Upon a Readathon TBR. And a lot of the books I selected are kind of chunky, but I'm excited. I'm excited there's so many fantasy books on my November TBR. I love October. I love spooky season, but I do kind of miss reading my fantasy books, so I'm excited to revisit quite a few fantasy series in November. If you liked this video, please give me a like and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you next time. Bye!